Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host, Wilfred Riley. Shamika's not feeling well, so we are trying to plug along without the star of the show. But we have an interesting guest who will make that a little easier. We are joined by Mary Grabar. She is a resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization, author of the often cited book, Debunking Howard Zinn, and her most recent book, Debunking the 1619 Project, which I have a lot to say about. Mary, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be here again.
Yeah, it's good to see you and to talk about all things America, culture, 1619, and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to talk about the books and those kind of things in a minute. But I wanted to start with Columbus. I know we're just past the holidays, seems like a weird place to start, but I've been, had the opportunity to speak at a couple of events lately here in the last month or two. And I was talking about, people understand these things when you tell stories and you kind of relate it. So I was talking about my son. My son, by the way, loves when I talk about him. It's kind of weird because he's young, but he came home after school on Tuesday after Columbus Day and said, my teacher said Columbus Day shouldn't be a holiday. I was like, that's an interesting thing to say. But, I didn't probe it too much. I asked him a couple questions. He laid out how it happened. Now, to make this clear, I'm not saying whether it should or not be. I have my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. I know a lot of people are pushing for Indigenous People Day and all that kind of stuff, or nothing at all. But the bottom line is that's the federal holiday. That is the reason why the school was closed. So it seemed odd that she would be telling the class that he shouldn't be. But then he went on to say they showed a video. And I'm supposed to be getting the video soon, but it's a little Indigenous girl, I'm assuming around his age, because they make it age appropriate so to suck them in. And she's offering him fish as he arrives, and he slaps the fish out of her hands, puts handcuffs on her, and sends her back to Spain. So, that seemed a little aggressive for 6-year-olds. And it doesn't really paint a true picture both of Columbus or why he has a holiday or Indigenous people. So, in the light of your speeches on Columbus being canceled, I want to start off by hearing what you think about that assignment for a second grade class and their portrayal of Columbus.
Yeah, well, as someone who grew up in the 60s and learning about Christopher Columbus, I'm an immigrant. I came here to this country as a 2-year-old from what was then communist Yugoslavia. And school was a place where I got acculturated. I learned how to become an American in school. And Columbus is part of our American identity. And George Washington was part of, the American identity. And, when you're 6 years old, you idealize adults. You should idealize adults. You should, honor your parents, and you should respect adults. You should respect your teachers. And I don't think a teacher has any right to, say critical things in that way to a 6-year-old. We need to be age appropriate, right? It's not like being a 16-year-old where you start being a little more critical and analytical. 6-year-olds are very literal. They have heroes. They need to feel safe, and they need to feel proud of, their family and their country. And so I think it borders on child abuse to say those things to little kids. I really do. It's an emotional abuse. It's an adult conversation. A 6-year-old doesn't have the knowledge or the sophistication to answer back. I'm sure your son is a little more sophisticated because he has your guidance, but it's not something that a teacher should be doing. And I think the reason why Columbus is being canceled, which was a Marxist project that Howard Zinn took up, is to delegitimate this country, to say we have no right to be here. That we should, and that's what Howard Zinn comes out and says. And to say that to a child and to contradict, what is a holiday, and to confuse them, I think is a very bad thing to do.
Will, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, let me unmute here. Yeah. So, I mean, I basically agree with that point. I mean, obviously, I've read through some of Mary's work before the show, and there's definitely a theme there. I mean, like there's, debunking Zinn, debunking the 1619 project, so on down the line. I mean, I myself, this sounds almost conspiratorial, but I mean, I've read a lot of 1930s, 1940s writings, Gramsci and so on. And the argument very specifically is, if we are a Marxist fourth column in the USA, we're probably not going to take over the traditional power centers. We're probably not going to take over business, at least immediately, sport, agriculture, the military. We have to control discourse. We have to get out there. They began with pamphleting, but we have to get out there and control what people hear so we can take these fringe niche ideas and we can push them into the mainstream. And I mean, you've definitely seen an attempt, mostly successful, be made to do this in, I mean, what would you guys say? Secondary education, higher education, the NGO sector, the media. I mean, the media, national media leans 93% to the left, center left through actually Marxist. I think the only channel any of us have appeared on, at least recently, is Fox. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. The point is that this actually happened. These niche ideas, you see this especially now with gender, but this is the older stuff, have become very prevalent in school. So your Columbus Day lesson for a small boy is going to be Columbus, how the genocide began, or something like that. And as an amoral leader, I absolutely think that this is insane. Like, ideally, you should never lie to kids, your wife, important people that play roles in society. But if you're going to lie, you should at least lie for the good. Like, the 1619 project strikes me as just incompetently amateurish. I mean, like, the Revolutionary War was fought to keep slavery going, and these kind of term paper level conclusions. But if you're going to say nonsense at that level, there's no real reason not to just say America, greatest country since Rome, over and over again. The idea is to catch people when they're vulnerable early on and hit them with this stuff. I don't know if I'm adding much to the conversation, but I agree that is the point of all this.
No, you always add stuff. That's fascinating. The part at the end is fascinating.
Thank you.
Because I like the part about if you're going to lie, lie for the good. So you have to ask the question. You have to probe and think about why. Because you two are academics, I'm not. So the simplified way of putting what Mary was saying about the young kid versus, getting more critical as they get older, is there's a foundation, right? All I want you, and I don't have a problem with hearing negative. I'm not saying Columbus was perfect. So, because people will hear this and say, oh, you're defending Columbus. So you're saying he didn't do anything wrong? You're saying he really found America and there were no people, whatever the madness that people say. It's like, no, there's two problems with that. One, foundation. Children need to develop first. So think of building a house. You pour the foundation. It needs to be dry first before you start building things on top of it. So if the footing is solid, then we can have those critical conversations later. But at 6, the foundation is still wet, regardless of how advanced the kid may be for his age. So that's one. But then Will's point, I didn't think about it that way, but lie for the good. So even if all of our heroes were bad in America, these kids are young, you're teaching them, you've got to tell these stories. Why wouldn't you lie, like you said, positively? Why would you say everything is great? Everything's coming up roses. Everybody's equal. Everybody can do it. You could all be president. You could all be president and be the center of one of the NBA teams and, be a professional actor and, start your own business all at the same time. There's plenty of hours to do it all, right? Just tell them they can do everything.
This is all very healthy to tell an 8-year-old girl. I mean, like, go out there, you're as fast as the boys, you're the smartest person in the world, you will be the first president like you. This is how everyone talks to their kids. Now, as you get older, you began to think of this as very patronizing if adults talk to you in this silly fashion. But to some extent, this is how you start legends. I mean, you're going to be physically attacked if in Italy or China you spit on the national flag. There are a collection of stories that go along with that. So, I mean, there's a lot of truth to this.
Right. And then the other thing, going to you, Mary, You study this stuff, Zinn, 1619 and all. My other problem is this. So I haven't had a chance to hash this out with the teacher. I just want to get an understanding. So what was the lesson plan? Columbus Day, it came up, you had to explain it to him. The lesson plan was pretty much Columbus bad, it sounds like. And this is always, Will and I, we talk about this all the time, the nuance and context in these things. I have no problem, again, for the third time with Columbus bad, point out the bad. But you're telling me you have nothing good to say, right? So you can't even explain any possible reasons why somebody thought it was a good idea for him to have a holiday. Nothing good. Okay, fine. I'll even give you that. The other problem, Mary, is there's nothing about indigenous people. So the way they frame it is Columbus is all bad, did nothing good. He was a bum of an explorer. He couldn't get anything right. He fell off the boat drunk and then he just slaughtered everybody, right? That's him. That sums him all up. On the
I
other
didn't know
side,
about the drinking.
well, you gotta pretty it up. And so before he got there, the indigenous people were here and they were building, I think they had built Google before he got here. Google was only refounded because Columbus tore it down, but they had originally, you know what I mean? There's nothing negative. So we don't hear about, so they I know I'm going to get, well, it's the truth. You have to teach the truth. Okay. People rape and kill. You don't teach that. Many of the tribes were not only fighting each other, but practicing cannibalism. Are you teaching that? So talk about that, how they say they're just teaching truth. And these kids need to understand, how, colonialism started and how bad the white man is, how bad all the stuff is. But they have nothing but glowing things to say about indigenous people.
Yeah, well, when I was reading Howard Zinn's book, it's ludicrous the way he presents, the 500 some tribes of North America. They're all like, hippies. They live in communes. They share. They don't think that much of monogamy or marriage. They can divorce easily. Even their potty training methods are superior. I mean, he goes into that. I mean, it's like this cartoonish presentation of Indians, and it's really insulting. And as I point out, during World War II, a lot of these tribes, they went to the induction centers, they brought their own rifles, they had this proud warrior tradition, and there's a lot of diversity among these people. I think we need to also talk about how insulting these images are of these people who are very complex and who, quite frankly, their civilization was different, but there were a lot of things that Westerners just thought of as something that they didn't practice. So there are differences in civilizations. I'm not saying there weren't immense cruelties in Western civilization, but you need to present a complex picture. And the thing is, you think about it, as someone who taught for 20 years, no longer teaching, I was canceled, but we're teaching the complex stuff to the little 6-year-olds. Okay, we're gonna be truthful, or this teacher thinks that she's being truthful, like most of the teachers are, and we're gonna give these little kids the hard truth. But once they get into high school and college, you're simplifying things for them. I mean, I felt immense pressure from department chairs and from people putting on conference panels, simplify it, 5-paragraph essay. Well, let's not even teach a 5-paragraph essay. Let's teach a little blog post. Let's do drawings, and this is for college freshmen or sophomores. So I think we've got it reversed, and we always need to, when it comes to education, keep in mind the maturity level of the students.
Right. But what do you think about the portrayal of the indigenous people? I know you, like me, talk about being an amoral businessman. You don't have that high opinion of people. People kind of suck. You don't expect them to be perfect or anything. But I just think it's funny the way they glaze over. Like I read some quote of what somebody's taking apart Columbus, right? Talking about all the bad he did. And it's a quote from, I don't know if it was him or someone who was with him, which is fine. Definitely made him look bad. But it kind of makes me laugh because they don't notice the rest of the stuff in the paragraph. So it's something about him landing here the first time. I think it was his writings. And he said, man, these people don't know anything. They don't know anything of weapons. I gave them a knife. They cut themselves because they didn't know what to do with that. And then the women, they're all naked and they're talking about what people were doing and all that kind of thing. And so we could easily conquer them. 50 people could easily control a whole tribe. So see, that's bad. He proved that he was trying to make money. He proved that he was okay with selling them as slaves. All that stuff. Yeah, I agree with that. Mm-hmm. Bad. But you're ignoring that it takes away the narrative of how wonderful they were living and how they were so advanced. And but for Columbus showing up again, they would be, we would have been 200 years advanced in North America.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So in terms of the amoral businessman thing, I mean, that's roughly accurate. I mean, I don't think I'm a huge asshole as a person, but I just use that as a descriptor when I get into these political topics. Like, I've been seen in a Catholic church, but I think that when we're talking about human political motivations, economic motivations, we see the same amoral incentives and the same behavior across human groups, races, cultures. So I think the great mistake of the conservative is sort of assuming that people outside their circle are going to be barbars. They're going to be kind of dumb, unlettered savages. The great mistake of the liberal, which is way worse, is assuming that people outside your circle are going to be some kind of brilliant geniuses that you have to learn from, every way, like going back to the Mikado, every way is better than mine, so on down the line. Mm-hmm. I think we see a lot of this second when it comes to these curricula. So I got a little misdirected with the last thing I said, but like one obvious thing is you don't have to lie to tell a selected version of the truth to kids. Like when we talk about Martin Luther King, the reason we build statues of the big guy is that he was one of America's greatest Black and civic leaders. He was responsible, along with Kennedy and Johnson, for the Civil Rights Act. We're not honoring the fact that, for example, he was a very well-known plagiarist, or that he was accused of having, seriously, a great man, but he was. We've read the dissertation, the one he cribbed it from. Like we're not honoring the fact that he, like his boy JFK, had 40 extramarital affairs. Was everyone sober enough to really consent back in the 50s, that male-dominated culture? I don't know. That's not what we're talking about with MLK and JLK, who, by the way, are great men. The point is not that they're not. But so with the Native Americans, you see America's presented as warts and all, or even all warts. The cultures we fought are presented as warts-free, beautiful. I mean, the reality with the Native Americans, I mean, first of all, you're describing the Taínos, the beautiful naked people who spend all day in dancing and making love. Right. One thing that's left out of that story is that the Taínos were basically food for the Arawak. It's like the Elok Morloi story. There was another tribe that really did know how to fight, that won several battles with Columbus, that had these arrows made out of like iron hard reeds from this region, that would regularly raid the Taíno settlements and just kill and eat 30 people and then leave. Yeah. So Columbus fought them. The Taíno were rapidly wiped out.
Right, but they were like, yay. In fact, didn't they think that some of the people, when they came, were like, good, you're going to help protect us from those guys, right?
Yeah, people would apparently like shiver uncontrollably and point to like the West and say monsters, monsters. And this became a part of the tradition. Like the idea of boogeymen is actually the boogie, a tribe in, I think, the southeastern Philippines are some of the greatest warriors in history, and who also apparently liked the taste of long pig and took hits. So when the Westerners got there, it was like, okay, these new lords are pretty obnoxious, a lot of rules, but maybe they'll save us from the boogeymen. That's the genesis of that legend. So of course, like the Arawak, the Comanche, the Boogie were not nicer people than the other warriors they fought. So it's a question of what story you want to tell. I'd prefer to hear the truth, but if you're going to lie at all, lie in our direction. We pushed the boogeymen back into the sea and saved our heroic naked allies. That would make a lot more sense to tell a kid than what we're telling kids.
Right. So, Mary, what about your speech was so offensive that you had to be canceled? You were going to talk about Columbus and tell us what happened?
Well, yeah, there was this organization, of Italian groups that was, sending me to a couple campuses. And One was the University of Florida in Gainesville, and we had planned this last spring for the first week in October and had everything all set up. This was a free event for the university. All my expenses and fee was being paid by this organization, and exactly a week before I was supposed to be there, they canceled. And they said it would be too divisive for me to speak about Columbus.
In the month of Columbus Day,
Yeah.
at, correct me if I'm wrong, a public university
Public university.
For
Ron
free.
DeSantis, are you listening?
for free.
Yes.
Well, maybe that's the problem. You weren't charging enough. Because I hear that.
No. I was getting a fee, but the university.
Right.
Right.
The organization was covering it.
Yeah.
And so they actually told you it was divisive?
That's what I heard.
Oh, right.
The organizers were arranging this.
They were told.
Yeah. So there was an additional expense. I had to change my plane ticket because I was also going to the University of Central Florida. A few
But
days.
that speech went well, right?
Well, I think the 5 people who showed up liked it. Because and this is what they do on campuses. I mean, I'm so used to this as from my long career as an adjunct and the tricks they play. But there's a room change. So this was for the Italian club. Okay, so these are students who are studying Italian culture and history. They have an interest in this, and so they've got this huge student center, in Orlando. It's almost like a shopping mall. You can get your, eyes examined. You can get your hair cut. There's like 10 different places where you can, steak and shake and everything you want, and meeting rooms galore in this brand new, shiny new center. And there aren't any meetings really going on at 6 o'clock that I noticed. But the 24 hours before, they had a room change. Okay. 30 minutes before, a room change.
Oh, wow.
And there's nothing else going on. I get to the room, to set up, and there's like this little sign saying room closed for maintenance. I had a friend coming in from out of town, driving in. She goes to the information desk. They have no information about my talk. There have been no notices put up. But this is what they do. I mean, it's what they did at Hamilton College here at the Alexander Hamilton Institute. We're independent, but we have had student interns. This organization was founded by 3 professors from Hamilton College. And so we sponsor reading groups and events and lectures for students. And when the Alexander Hamilton Institute, not me personally, but the organization I'm affiliated with, when we would pay to bring speakers in to campus, reserve a room, no publicity, there are all these sabotages. That's the way they try to do it. And so you can't say like, so there was an article about, my canceled talk at the University of Florida, and the reporter from College Fix called, and the spokesperson said, well, it's impossible to say why it was canceled. So, they can, what they want us to do is to just shut up and go away. Right.
Well, let's contrast that for a little context. I'm always talking about it, that's important. So you wanted to speak in October about Columbus, the month of Columbus Day, planned out 6-7 months in advance. It gets canceled. So I hear your most recent book is Debunking the 1619 Project. Well, I hear the woman who wrote that, Nikole Hannah-Jones, had to speak. Oh, you were speaking at a public university, also at a public library, and it turned out a little different for her. Can you talk about that speech she did at the public library?
Yeah, Nikole Hannah-Jones, who,
Will's best bud. She got him the other day though. I had to laugh. I'm sorry, Will. Love you like a little brother, but I have to say, good for Nikole Hannah-Jones. That was funny. She got you. She blocked him like I did. She blocked you too. You have that in common.
oh,
So
really? Oh, yeah.
yeah. So she hasn't blocked me yet. She just called us mediocre. But so she blocked him a long time ago, and he tweeted something, and so I'm sorry, so good. So she unblocked him so she could comment on it, and then she blocked him again.
This is like junior high school,
Sorry.
Little brother, right? But no, yeah, this is a real thing that happened. Yeah. So Nikole Hannah-Jones, I had commented, she had said something critical about me, like these guys are amateurs. And I'm a tenured professor at a state university. Like I don't really pull rank, but it was like Nikole Hannah-Jones, I think, has a master's degree, was a journalist and then got hired for a ton of money and was going on this rant about like the low quality academics of the 1776 Unites Project. It was like John Sibley Butler and Glenn Lowry and all this. Right. So I made fun of her. I was just like, if Nikole Hannah-Jones seriously wants to debate me, I'm available at any time. And I like posted a schedule and was like, yeah, this is never going to happen. And Nikole Hannah-Jones said something. She was funny too, but it was like I was going back and forth. She blocked me. And then, like the other day, I noticed there were like 100 people responding to something in my Twitter feed. And I looked at it. It was under the Nikole Hannah-Jones debate thread. And I couldn't see it because Nikole Hannah-Jones had apparently unblocked me, made a legitimately funny joke, and then blocked me again so she couldn't lose an argument. It was one of the lamest but funniest things I've seen in social media. And like all of these people were just arguing with this blank square that said tweet is unavailable. And a lot of them seem to have been blocked too. So people were like sharing screenshots of her jokes and so on. Anywho,
Nikole Hannah-Jones, you'll never watch this, but kudos to you. That was funny. I'm gonna give you credit.
It's pretty funny. Yeah.
That was pretty funny. But anyway, so she was speaking. You were saying so she was speaking.
Oh yeah.
And what happened at this public library?
Well, I actually had three concerned women in Arlington who handed out flyers for my book as people were walking in. But Nikole Hannah-Jones, prima donna that she is, she got $40,000 for a 45-minute talk, and would not allow it to be recorded because she knows that she's lying, and I've caught her in some lies. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't want to be challenged. And that's why she blocks people because, when I started presenting some facts to her, she blocked me and she called my book a little pamphlet.
She's so vindictive. I laugh at her. So it's so funny. It just makes me laugh.
It's just the schoolyard trash talking. And it's kind of funny. I do that too. I remember she once posted a picture with a gold grill and was like, I'm gangsta. And a lot of my friends actually are pretty gangsters. So, I mean, I happen to have a red, white, and blue fanged grill. Not something I normally wear with the Brooks Brothers suit. But I put it on and posted a picture with Taboo and was like, when's that debate happening? It's all I'm focused on. And I mean, so, you had fun with that kind of thing. But NHJ takes it to like a crazy level. Like one of her posts was calling National Review an unknown tabloid.
Right,
it's just this incredible arrogance based on nothing. And you see a lot of this on that side of the political left. And it comes from, I think, last sentence, but it comes from kind of petted, cosseted victimization. Like your entire life, very often, you've been doing just sort of mediocre or around par work. She didn't do badly at Notre Dame, but you're constantly told you are the best, most amazing, most wonderful person by these white liberals and hipsters. I've seen it. I had it happen to me before I started saying taboo things like women have vaginas. I mean, and now it is interesting to contrast like the actual competition of the real world. Competing in academia as a center right guy with normal beliefs or applying as a white or Asian kid to a lot of these schools with kind of that path upward where you're told you're oppressed all the time, but things work really smoothly.
Well, the funny thing for me is she could have easily, when attacking me, said, hey, academic, because, hey, I don't have a PhD. But what she said to me was weird. Kudos again to Nikole Hannah-Jones because she hasn't blocked me. But what she said was, I thought was an odd backhanded attack. She said that I never read the project. Clearly, you've never read the project. But I literally quote there's a chapter on every essay. I picked the entire essay apart, right? It's like, oh, you didn't read it. I could be wrong. You can say I'm wrong and you don't know what you're doing. You're a bad writer even. But to say I didn't read it but there are quotes from it. Well, how do you think I got the quotes?
Yeah, she said that to me, and she said that to Phil Magnus, who wrote a book debunking the economic arguments. It's like everyone, that implies that we are incapable of understanding it. Our reading comprehension is not sophisticated enough, though we may have PhDs, and though, we just cannot comprehend it.
But her arguments are weak because if you wanted to say you're just not smart enough to comprehend it, then say that. I mean, she's now a tenured professor. She should be good with words, but she didn't say you don't understand it. She said she didn't read it. But so I'm going to prove right here on the air. I'm going to prove I read it, because she has an essay called Capitalism. And she talks about, it's funny because she does a modifier, like a flavor, right? It's not just capitalism, it's American capitalism, right? And talking about how American capitalism is obviously rooted in slavery and how it's bad and it benefits certain people and not Blacks. But what do you call the thing? Do I want to go to the PhD in English or the PhD who teaches poli-sci right now? But what do you call a person who charges $40,000 to speak for 45 minutes and then says, and if you record it and I find out I want another 100 grand? What is the system that allows her to charge her own rate and then make large sums of money?
I mean, ladies first, it's a very simple.
I'm guessing it's the system she decried in the book and the project that made her wealthy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to hear Mary's response to this, but just again, I think so much of this is the result of not being genuinely criticized in open debate, like being unwilling to, skipping the major conferences, skipping debates with frankly quite serious people like me or you or John McWhorter. Like, even if you're not an academic, which isn't necessarily a meaningful title, like being a well-known journalist who's published a couple of best-selling books. I mean, if you were Matt Iglesias, I don't think there'd be any issue at all with her engaging online. But I mean, there's this whole pipeline. It's interesting to try to work this out because I haven't spent days thinking about it. But there's this whole pipeline where people are constantly complimented for fairly unimpressive work and end up believing that they genuinely do know far more about the topic or are far more prepared to discuss it than the people they're going against. Like Phil Magnus, actually, I've read some of his work just out of curiosity. I mean, he's one of the better historians in the game. I mean, he just dragged Kevin Cruz into a plagiarism scandal. So, like, if he was close reading my books, I'd be really paying attention.
Right.
And her response isn't, well, I think I'm slightly better than this guy. I think I'm on point. It wouldn't be what my response might be. It's just sort of like, who is he to criticize me? Who's heard of this little fellow? And it's weird. It's the end result of this process of undeserved flattery, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, we were talking before about, kids are told you can be whatever you want to be. You can be president, and every movie star and everything else. But first, learn your multiplication tables.
Okay.
Right. First, win a spelling bee.
Right.
And I think that people like Nikole Hannah-Jones, who have just been lifted up, and I've seen this happen, and unfortunately, it's often, white liberal professors feeling guilt, promoting people who aren't qualified yet, who haven't done the work. And I think there's really some anger within her. I mean, deep down, people like that have to know that they're frauds. They have to know that, they're, in some ways, they're being used as a tool by, white people who want to alleviate their guilt and to make themselves feel better by pushing this person up. And they don't care if she's lying. I mean, I was giving this talk once, and I don't know if you've seen her children's book, Born on the Water.
No, I've missed it.
Oh, you got to see the cover. It's cute little black kids floating in the water like they're about to drown. Or at least they're cute.
I'm gonna pull this up on my phone. I'm a multitasker.
Yeah, it came out the same time as the book, the 1619 book.
Yeah.
So what were you saying about it?
Well, it's based on lies. Now, I caught her when the Woman King came out, she knows, that, the founding fathers did not invent slavery, that the people who were brought here had been captured already in Africa.
Mhm.
But in that children's book, which is used K-8, wide span, it tells you, that the students aren't learning to read very well because they're reading picture books in 8th grade. But she talks about the white people coming in and kidnapping mommies and daddies.
Mhm.
I mean, she knows that's false. She is lying about it. And so I was giving this talk and I was saying this, and this woman, I think she was a liberal white woman, says, well, why do you object to that story being told to kids? I said, it's not true. So, but so what? And I'm like, it's not true. Do you understand that? I mean, you don't have to tell the whole unvarnished truth to young kids, but why vilify a whole race of people with these falsehoods? I mean, slavery was a very complicated thing. I mean, all kinds of people were complicit in it, but that's something that you would learn later, as you study history. But why tell these lies? And I don't know what she was thinking, but Nikole Hannah-Jones deliberately lies, and that's why she won't debate. She knows she's lying, and she knows she's going to get caught in those lies.
But here's the funny thing too. I always say, being as simple as I am, I make it real easy for you. If everything's as bad as it is, why do you need to lie? If the truth is so bad, why do you need to lie? Then all the bad you mentioned should be actually true, factual, not exaggerated, because it's so bad, it's easy. So the fact that you feel you have to lie or not tell a lie, but multiply the number of times. So you say something bad, which is true, but then you'll say that happened 20,000 times when it happened 4 times, right? Those kind of things, right? And a lot of the project of we're going to get into that briefly, but get into that and where they're wrong. But the problems with what I get in trouble is the problems with the things that are even right and why that's still presented in a bad way. But one last thing I want to mention to Will, because Will, you're both active on Twitter, but Will more so than the two of us, so he sees a lot of this. There's another factor to this, Will. What about the fact that Nikole gets to say whatever she wants? She gets paid $40,000 from public libraries who don't have the budget for it, all this kind of stuff, and it's fine. Not only is it weirdly against what she writes about capitalism, like I joked before, but more seriously, no one really attacks it for it. It's like, I mean, conservatives will say, man, that's a lot of money. The opportunity is not everywhere else, but no one just says, how dare she, right? I believe in her premise, but how dare she take so much money? She should be down for the cause. Yet people who do the same thing that she does for far less money, but with an opposite point of view, what's the word that they use, Will? Oh, grifter, right? They're all grifters. So if you're speaking out against Nikole Hannah-Jones, you're a grifter, even if you're not being paid. So she can get paid $40,000. Saint, you do it for free, grifter. $1,000, grifter. Explain that phenomenon.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one for me. I mean, I'm competitive enough to be curious about how I can get my $40,000 check for talking for 30 minutes and not letting the client record. I mean, it's a new one on me. It's usually, I'm actually pretty well paid as a speaker, and it's like maybe 5, and there's a plane ticket and economy. I mean, speaking something a lot of, scholars and athletes and so on do, and it's not normally, $1,000 a minute. I've heard a couple people, by the way, it might have been NHJ, who said she won't speak for less than $1,000 a minute because it's what the ancestors deserve or whatever. So there's a deep dichotomy between all of these people who constantly object to capitalism. They don't want actual potato farm socialism, right? They want like eternal freshman year in college where they get a stipend from somebody, they're unsure on who, and they spend the day, relaxing and using various substances and, producing terrible art. That is kind of left-wing upper middle class communism. But all of them, I mean, Ibram Kendi just got a $10 million grant from Twitter. I don't want it to sound like a jealous guy who's in the equal position on the other side of the spectrum, although, maybe, someone can come holler at me, Google.
Million? You'll take a million, right? I mean,
just 1 million. Yeah. Google, Microsoft leans a little bit right. I mean, Parler, if Kanye goes back to sanity. I mean, there are people out there. Although I'm a philo Semite myself. But anyway, like, ramble aside, yes, all these people say that they are intensely anti-capitalist and are extraordinarily capitalist. You just saw Greta Thunberg sign something like $1 million book deal while also criticizing the capitalist global racial patriarchy, etc. So it's kind of more catechism than anything else, but it's definitely there. The grifter idea, again, like most of their ideas, internalized whiteness and so on, I don't think there's anything empirically testable, anything reliable or valid to this. But it is the idea that people who are saying these evil right-wing things, especially if they're minorities or they're former feminists, must be lying. I think that's the idea. The idea of grifting is that you're lying to get money.
Right.
But I mean, it's just not a valid idea. Like, if you're accusing me of using a right-wing talking point, I mean, first of all, I probably wrote it. I mean, I have a decent influence by this point. But secondarily, like, anything Nikole Hannah-Jones says is just a left-wing talking point to some extent. Slavery made this country wealthy. Well, not really. I mean, the South is still recovering from the negative impact of that. Low production agriculture, constant race conflict, so on. So I don't think grifter has any meaning at all. Most people work for money.
Right. Anything you want to add, Mary, before we go on to prove that we read the project?
Yeah, well, I mean, this notion that, communists really believe in sharing and working on the potato farm, that it has never been the case. It's been, the big lie in history that, people are going to share, they're all going to chip in, they're all going to work, they're all going to, go out.
These communists are different. They just have a baseline they have to get to before they share.
Right.
So get your first 20 mil and then you start sharing.
Well, I'm sure that's Nikole Hannah-Jones's plan, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. Wow.
Well, it does approach comedy, right? Like, Patrice Cullors recently said she thought she had enough houses. Like, during Black Lives Matter, the head of the largest group, Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, bought, one of you might correct me, but 6 homes, a mansion with a helipad, one back in the old neighborhood in Watts, but that's not the hood anymore. I mean,
Canada.
Another one, a love cottage, she called it, in Georgia. And I mean, they didn't take in all that much money for that one organization, maybe 100 mil. These are 10. I'm sure that there's a paper trail where they purchased legitimately or whatnot at that level. But I mean, Charles, you're not.
No, I'm
sure
sure. No, I'm sure there is. No,
I'm sure there's something there. My accountant, anyway. But so I think this is really common. The idea of I'll give back when I make enough. It's just tough to know when you've made enough, I think. So the Birkenstock Bolsheviks have been around for a while, not going anywhere now.
That's right.
Absolutely true. So in our last few minutes here, we have to get into your second book, the most recent one anyway, Debunking the 1619 Project, is now out on paperback. So those of you who wanted it, but you're like, hardcover's a little hard to carry around, a little pricey, go buy a couple copies of the paper copy. So let's talk quickly first about what you added. What's new in the paperback from the hardcover?
Well, what I did is I went through her book and
oh, that's right, because she didn't. You like me wrote about the project itself, about the essays, right?
Right, because that's all that was out.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, for months, while I could still follow her on Twitter, I saw she was announcing, oh, this book will answer all the critics. We have 1,000 footnotes. We have more historians. This is going to settle things.
She fixed it? Did she fix it?
No, and that's what my 20,000 word or 12,000 word appendix is about. It just goes mostly through her essays and what she claims she has done. And I look at the footnotes. One of the footnotes goes back to herself because she basically said, I said it. So if we were, grading papers, a research paper, say, wait a minute, this is not a legitimate source. And I just go through it and, just expose what she does. like Howard Zinn, what she does is she twists around the words of her sources. So you go back to the original book and you say, wait a minute, this is not what, this professor said, or read to the next page and you'll see what, he really meant. But she misrepresents her sources. And though it's, 500 pages, it's full of fluff, and the footnotes really mean very little. So it's not an answer to her critics.
Well, let me ask you this. Your book came out around the same time mine did. You were kind enough to read mine for me. I interviewed you, so I'd read yours. So maybe I shoot a couple of things that I remember. It's been a while since I read it, but did she correct the problem of why the 1619 versus 1620? Right? We all grew up knowing about Plymouth Rock. Did she correct why America had to be founded at 1619 here, not 1 year, European? There's very few differences between the two. She could have still said slavery eventually ended there, but she never really explained that, not to mention the fact that there were slaves in other parts of America before that. But did she address that?
No, I mean, she kind of doubled down, and she said, well, the reason she focused on 1619 was because so many of the presidents came from Virginia, and it owned the most, there were the most slaves there, and this and this and this and this happened in Virginia, and it really has no historical significance when it comes to the Revolutionary War. But she wanted to take that traditional understanding of, the story of the Pilgrims and say, well, no, Virginia was more important. And that conveniently fits in with her thesis that it was, the slaves who, produced all the wealth in this country and who started, democracy. There was a slaveocracy before,
right?
White people learned from the slaves. I'm
we'll get back in there, but I got one more, because she fixed this. You said you before you got blocked, you followed her on Twitter, said the book is going to come, it's going to answer the critics. Did she find a way to mention, I don't know, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, or Ulysses S. Grant? Since she talked about Reconstruction. Because they weren't in the original essays.
No, she doesn't talk about Booker T. Washington. What's that?
Oh, I said I'm not surprised by that. The sort of alternative Black narrative, a nuanced but real patriotism, work your way up. I mean, that doesn't strike me as something.
But if you leave him out, you have to leave out the schools, right? You have to leave out all the work. You have to leave out everything he did, right? Forget about the way he had a different view on America. You also have to leave out everything he did.
Well, there's a whole alternative narrative. If you ever sit down for 3-hour dinners with Bob Woodson, I mean, there's a whole alternative narrative of, everyone sort of building together as ethnic conflict declined. And this, with a bit more cynicism, is what I essentially believe, the Rosenwald schools and so on. Yep. So it wasn't like slaves came to the USA from medieval African warrior societies and taught us everything, but we abused them nonetheless until civilization arrived in 1968. I mean, that's just not what happened.
No, yeah. Well, Booker T. Washington really, in my opinion, was a subversive. I mean, he knew what he had to do, and he knew that. I mean, there's a good book about him called Up From History, and I highly recommend it because what he knew that economic empowerment was the source of all empowerment, and when a certain group of people relies on you for a certain product, they respect you, and you've got power, and so that's what he was aiming for. And I think the truth about him should be taught in our schools. I mean, I think he was a real sort of I don't know, he was an American hero. And my next book, he was an inspiration for George Schuyler.
And then lastly, you wrote an article about the other piece that I wanted to talk about. So we talk about the things she said that you know, the lies of omission, and we talk about the, you know, outright inaccuracies. But then there's another thing where there's truth. A lot of the people with this narrative commonly make the mistake of what you call presentism. You know, taking what happened in the past, factual, and just trying to measure it up to what happens today, right? So, and judging generations past in a different time by our time, you know, on social media with iPhones and all the luxuries we have today, and looking back on those in the past and saying clearly they were inferior because look at the things they did, not measuring what happened elsewhere in the world or the difference between, you know, 1700 and today. So talk about how that also skews the framework of the 1619 project.
Yeah, well, you know, this, we go back to Howard Zinn too, you know, because there's, you know, he sort of was the popularizer of all the bad things we're seeing in historical scholarship. And so in an essay that he wrote for a volume dedicated to Herbert Marcuse, he talked about how the practice of history needed to change. So historians shouldn't be up in their dusty shelves looking at old books and records and going through archives. They should be fighting for justice, which at the time, 1967, according to Howard Zinn, was civil rights and the Vietnam War. Well, once you start doing that, you start, you know, seeing, you know, activism as an objective as a historian or any kind of academic. You have to start leaving things out. And so that became acceptable. And so there was the case of I think his name is James Sweet, who's the president of the American Historical Association. And he very mildly criticized the 1619 Project for presentism, for distorting history. And he also slammed, you know, conservatives as well. And he said, this is a problem in the profession these days. And people just piled on him, and he made this abject apology. It was worthy of anything that was said at the Soviet show trials. I mean, you know, and it's really pathetic what has happened, that there is this pressure to take a political position rather than stick to the truth as an academic, as a historian. And so that I think explains why the 1619 Project is being embraced, you know, when it should be just sort of laughed out of court. You know, what this is ludicrous. You know, this is a cartoonish picture of American history as propaganda. But people are afraid to say anything critical about it. Right. And that's the sorry state we're in when it comes to scholarship. For, you know, that's accepted, that's allowed. So I wrote a couple articles about that as well.
Yeah, I want to go to Will, but one thing, anything you want to respond to that, Will, but also this, when she talked about Sweet and, you know, the typical, I always talk about the both side thing, where he wanted to gently critique the 1619 projects, but he had to critique the right too. Everybody's open for criticism. But he did the thing, I don't know if you read it, but he did the thing where they say, where he's kind of creating a straw man. He's saying that it's bad that conservatives does this thing. And if the conservatives were doing it, it would be bad, but they're not really doing it. So he's like, and to the conservatives too, shame on them. They don't want to talk about slavery at all. And they want to ban history, and they want to ban all this stuff. It wasn't books, but it's like they want to ban the teaching of anything negative about America. They want to ban the teaching of slavery or the way Blacks were treated in history, which is not true, right? Even with, you know, you know, it's like the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. They term it that. The media jumps on board. You believe it what it says. You read it. That's not what it says. No one's saying you can't teach. In fact, in some of the places they're saying you have to teach that. Just don't do it in this frame. Don't say all whites. Don't make people feel bad. Don't blame the students. But they say you have to teach it. But Mary said that he critiqued the right, but that's what he critiqued them for something they didn't really do. Oh, you could.
Yeah. I'm remembering that now because I did go to the 1776 curriculum, and they have books on slavery for third graders. And so what he was,
isn't that Hillsdale?
Yes.
Yeah, of course they have that in there. There's no way they're not using it. I just came from there. They got statues of Frederick Douglass all over campus, and he spoke there.
Yeah, that's a lie.
That's nonsense, right?
Yeah.
But anything you want to add on that, Will?
I mean, I think you guys summed it up pretty well. So yeah, SJWs are always lying, basically, in one sentence. Like the art, that's the whole point. It's a Marxist narrative or quasi-Marxist or ethno-Marxist narrative that's directed at a currently dominant opponent society. So they think that they're willing to do pretty much anything. I agree with Mary. Obviously, there's no one on the sane right or center IDW that wants to not teach about slavery or the Indian Wars. We know how we got the country and how every other country was acquired. I do find the pattern you described to be common and annoying. I don't know if either of you guys read the Harper's letter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but they were talking about intellectual intolerance on the left, and it was for readers of Harper's. It was strictly for like lower upper class smart people that are liberal. But the first page of the letter is just all these attacks on the right, like, and Donald Trump does the same thing. It may even be worse. Yeah, I mean, so there's nothing wrong with just saying, if you said that the Revolutionary War was fought to preserve slavery, or that everything unique to America, like really good neo-Indian food, came from Black slavery, that's just stupid and wrong. You don't need to couch it in you don't need to pat it behind this wall of pleasant words. But yeah, you see that all the time, and you see it in a particular sector. If you're Black and on the right, that's not how anybody talks to you online. So,
well, I'm gonna give Mary the last word before we go. But one thing you just said again that makes me laugh is another. I'm gonna end both with something. I'm gonna do a twofer. I'm gonna do something positive about the 1619 project and prove to my buddy Nikole Hannah-Jones that I read the project. Because to the project's credit, it does say that some things are, like as Will said, unique and great in America. It kind of shocked me when it said it was an accident, but it said it because it says something like the way Will mentioned, something like everything great about America, all of its exceptionalism was created through, theft or through slavery or through forced labor and all these other things, which is the negative thing. But I have to say, they're admitting by mistake that something great happened in America. That's the only time they said anything positive about America. When they said anything you got that's great, you stole it from the Blacks, but at least they got something great. Kudos for them for saying that. And it again proves that I read it. Nikole Hannah-Jones, I did read the project. Mary, anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all people contributed to this country, and I don't see Nikole Hannah-Jones wanting to leave, no matter how the elections
No, they're paying them millions of dollars. Of course she doesn't want to leave.
Yeah, no one's willing to leave, and that's what I tried to do in the Debunking the 1619 project, is to acknowledge, the labor and the intellectual contributions, of people who had been enslaved, as well as indentures, as well as people from Europe, from all across the globe. And that's why they come here for opportunity. And so, I hope that, my book can fill in that huge gap of what the 1619 project leaves out. And, as someone, who grew up in a different culture, at home, being a child of immigrants, and knowing that, that there are conflicts within all groups of people. There are tribal conflicts, there are religious conflicts, but to have what we have here today is really something that is exceptional. I mean, it's, it is different, and we need to acknowledge the contributions of everyone.
Especially the Black people, according to Nikole Hannah-Jones. She is Mary Grabar, resident fellow at the Alexander Hamilton Institute for the Study of Western Civilization and the author of Debunking the 1619 Project. Mary, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.